My husband has an estate worth $80 million, as well as this house, which will all pass down to me. Since we don't have children, everything will be mine. My sister-in-law often speaks in a somewhat demanding tone. I'm Emma, a 45-year-old part-time worker. My husband and I have two sons, one in his senior year and the other a sophomore in high school. My eldest son is preparing for college entrance exams this year. He dreams of becoming a lawyer and has been studying very hard for it. He's wanted to be a lawyer since he was a little boy, probably inspired by my older brother, Oliver. Oliver is a lawyer who, a few years ago, started his own law firm and even hired a few other lawyers. My eldest son admired him growing up. He always loved studying and got good grades, even in elementary school. When Oliver found out my son wanted to follow in his footsteps, he was thrilled and encouraged him. Every time they meet, my son proudly tells Oliver, "I'll become a lawyer like you, Uncle." Oliver laughs and replies, "Hurry up and become one, so you can follow my path." Oliver is married but has no children. When he visits, he plays with my sons and spoils them. His wife, who is 10 years younger, doesn't come along much. She's a bit difficult and eccentric, so we don't talk to her often. Oliver and I lost our parents when we were young. He stood in as a parent figure at my wedding. After I got married, he married his wife, and we were happy to know he'd found someone. But when we first met his fiancée, we were surprised by how sulky she looked. We expected her to be cheerful since she was about to marry Oliver, but she seemed unhappy. I politely said to them, "You two look great together." However, when I got home, I told my husband how surprised I was by her attitude. My husband agreed and said she didn't seem like the nicest bride. Soon after, Oliver and his wife got married, and he bought a magnificent house. We visited with our children to celebrate. The house was amazing, as expected of my brother, who owns a law firm. However, my sister-in-law wasn't there. Jokingly, my husband asked Oliver, "Has your wife already left you?" But Oliver's serious expression made us uneasy. Oliver explained that whenever there's a disagreement, his wife returns to her parents' house. Today, she was staying over there to celebrate her mother's birthday. My husband felt bad about his joke. Then, out of nowhere, Oliver asked us seriously, "If I can't have children, can I adopt one of yours?" I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He looked completely serious. I didn't know how to respond to my brother's unexpected suggestion about adoption. My husband, however, laughed and said, "We don't know what the future holds, so let's talk about it when the time comes. If you're okay with our children, you're free to adopt whichever you want." He didn't seem to take it seriously and dismissed it, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was more worried about the fact that my brother and his wife didn't seem to be getting along. It wasn't my place to interfere in their marriage, but I couldn't help being concerned. After that, whenever we visited my brother's house or he came to ours, it was always just him. My sister-in-law was never around. My brother also never mentioned her, and I avoided bringing her up. They had been married for over 10 years, and honestly, I had almost forgotten she existed. This year, my eldest son got into his dream law school. When my brother came to our house to celebrate, he brought up adoption again. He said, "Like I mentioned before, would you let me adopt one of your kids?" My brother and his wife couldn't have children, so he was asking again, this time more seriously than before. Back when they were newly married, it didn't feel urgent, but now his tone had changed. My husband, however, still treated it lightly and responded, "Would you prefer our eldest son, since he wants to be a lawyer?" He said it casually, but I was cautious. Adoption is a huge, life-changing decision for our sons. Even though they'd be with my brother, their uncle, I couldn't help but worry about how my sister-in-law might treat them. After all, they wouldn't be her biological children. I asked my brother directly, "Is your wife okay with the idea of adopting?" He gave me a strained smile and said, "Don't worry about her, we've already talked about it." That reassured me a little, but I still couldn't decide right away. I wanted to discuss it with my two sons first, since they were old enough to make their own decisions. We left the topic there for the day. A few days later, though, I received a call from my brother's law office. They told me he had collapsed, and I rushed to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my brother's colleagues from the law firm waiting outside with worried faces. My brother had suffered a stroke at work and was unconscious. After I arrived, the staff left, telling me they hadn't been able to contact his wife. I tried calling their home landline, but no one answered. I didn't have my sister-in-law's cell phone number, so I searched my brother's belongings and found his smartphone. With my second son's help, we unlocked it and found her number. When I called her, she answered angrily, shouting, I told you not to call me again. I'll sue you. I quickly explained. It's Emma, Oliver's sister. My brother passed out and is in the hospital. Her tone immediately softened. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was Oliver. Did you say he collapsed? I explained his condition and told her which hospital he was in. To my surprise, she replied cheerfully, I can't come right now, I have things to do. Please let me know if anything changes. And then hung up. I couldn't believe she had more important things to do while her husband was hospitalized. Realizing she wouldn't be any help, my family decided to take care of my brother ourselves. Since my eldest son had finished his university entrance exams and had free time, he visited the hospital every day for me. Unfortunately, my brother never regained consciousness and remained in critical condition. His wife never called or visited, not even once. A week later, I called her again, hoping she'd reconsider. This time, she answered quickly and asked in a disturbingly cheerful tone, What's the matter? Did he die? Her rudeness shocked me, but I calmly replied, He's still alive. Why don't you visit the hospital? She snapped back, I'm not a doctor or a spiritual healer. What good would it do for me to visit? Furious at her attitude, I hung up. I started to think back to why my brother wanted to adopt one of my sons. Perhaps he had already given up on having children with her because their marriage wasn't going well. When they first got married, I had asked how they met. My brother said they met through a marriage counseling agency. Maybe she married him because he was a lawyer, thinking she'd have a comfortable life. The thought made me even angrier. When I shared my suspicions with my husband, he pointed out something even more upsetting. If Oliver dies, his wife will inherit everything since they don't have children. Maybe that's why he brought up adoption the other day. He was thinking about his inheritance. I regretted not making a decision about the adoption earlier. Later, I casually mentioned the adoption to my sons. To my surprise, my second son said he'd be happy to be adopted. Unlike my eldest son, who had clear goals, my second son wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. He seemed to think being adopted by Oliver would give him an easy, comfortable future. I thought my eldest son, who admired his uncle, would want to be adopted, but his response surprised me. I don't want to be adopted because I'm the eldest, and it's my responsibility to take care of you and Dad, he said. I was deeply touched by his answer. At the same time, I felt conflicted because I knew my eldest son, aspiring to be a lawyer, would have been the perfect choice for adoption. I was heartbroken that I couldn't finalize the adoption while my brother was unconscious. I didn't care about inheriting his wealth, but I strongly opposed the idea of my sister-in-law, who seemed to be waiting for his death, getting anything. I could only pray for my brother's recovery. Sadly, he passed away a few days later. With no choice, I called my sister-in-law to inform her, my brother recently passed away. Can we arrange a funeral? Her response shocked me. Cheerfully, she said, everything is up to you. Just don't involve me as a pallbearer. I don't want to deal with the formalities. Before I could respond, she hung up. My husband and I took on the responsibility of planning the funeral. The staff from my brother's law firm helped us immensely. My husband was worried about the firm's future, but my brother had already arranged for its management to continue smoothly under a trusted colleague. The firm would remain operational as a corporation. Many people attended the funeral, presidents of major companies, politicians, and other prominent figures. The number of wreaths was so overwhelming they couldn't fit in the hall. Seeing this, I was once again reminded of how incredible my brother was. My eldest son helped with the arrangements, but my second son, seeing the high-profile attendees, expressed frustration. I should have been adopted. I didn't realize how amazing he was. My husband and I understood his regret. I served as the pallbearer, and no one questioned why my sister-in-law wasn't there. In fact, no one even mentioned her. My brother and his wife hadn't had a wedding, just a honeymoon, so even some relatives might not have realized he was married. In that moment, I thought, if this is what it's come to, I almost wish they'd never married at all. What's the point of a wife who doesn't even attend her husband's funeral? I also regretted not agreeing to the adoption earlier. Now, I feared my sister-in-law would take everything my brother had worked for. After the funeral, we invited everyone to my brother's house for a meal, to thank them. I told them, my brother can rest in peace, because of your support. It was a somber moment for all of us. Just then, my sister-in-law arrived in a flashy pink coat, making a grand entrance. With a big smile, she announced loudly, my husband's $80 million estate and this house will all be passed down to me, his wife, since we don't have children. Everything is mine. She said this triumphantly, but to everyone's surprise, some of the lawyers from the firm began laughing. Confused, we all looked at them. My sister-in-law, glaring at the lawyers, yelled, "What are you laughing about? How rude." One lawyer, smirking, replied, "We know you're officially divorced." The settlement was finalized the day before he collapsed. I froze in shock and exclaimed, "What, you were divorced?" I looked at my sister-in-law's face, which had turned pale as she stared at the lawyers who had just revealed the truth. Her expression was terrifying as she clenched her teeth. Then, one of the lawyers continued, "You were also ordered to pay alimony because your affair caused the divorce. It's unavoidable." Furious, my sister-in-law yelled, "I don't have to pay alimony. Who's left to receive it now?" She spoke mockingly, as though she had outsmarted everyone, but the lawyer quickly responded, "The right to alimony doesn't disappear, it's inherited. Since Emma is the inheritor, you'll have to pay her." It hit me at that moment. I was my brother's sole inheritor. Our parents were gone, and with no children or other relatives, everything fell to me. My sister-in-law seemed to realize this too. Her horrified expression made me take a step back, but she wasn't ready to give up and began yelling again. "Don't I get half the estate? Isn't that how it works?" she shouted. One of the lawyers, looking annoyed, replied, "Oliver already gave you a settlement when the divorce was finalized. There's a receipt to prove it." He also explained that my brother had purchased the house before their marriage, so it wasn't part of the assets to be divided. The lawyers continued to counter her every argument. Then, as if she remembered something, she smirked and said, "But I'm still the beneficiary of his life insurance. That's not part of the estate." Her confidence, even in such a situation, stunned me. However, the lawyer immediately shut her down again. Oliver was meticulous. When the divorce was finalized, he likely changed the beneficiary. Curious, I searched through my brother's belongings and found the life insurance policy. My sister-in-law snatched it out of my hands and impatiently looked for the beneficiary's name. After a few seconds, her shoulders dropped in disappointment. She handed it back to me silently. Sure enough, the beneficiary was me. Realizing she was losing everything, she screamed out her true feelings without thinking. "I married a lawyer because I thought he'd be rich, and now I've ended up with nothing but a little money, and I have to pay alimony. This is a disaster." One of the lawyers, with a grim expression, replied, "Oliver said the same thing. He regretted going to that marriage counselor. He admitted marrying you was the biggest mistake of his life." Hearing this shocked me. My brother had never shared such feelings with me, but it was clear he had been honest with his colleagues. Unable to win this argument, my sister-in-law stormed out of my brother's house. Later, she was forced to pay alimony in installments. However, since she didn't have a job, she quickly started looking for one. Unfortunately, having never worked seriously before, she quit every job after a short time. Desperate, she returned to the same marriage counseling agency where she'd met my brother. She began searching for another wealthy man to marry, hoping to solve her financial troubles quickly. When she finally found a rich man, she told him. After my sister-in-law remarried, she started scheming to take money from her new husband. However, the man quickly realized her intentions and reported her to the police. She was arrested for marriage fraud. According to one of the lawyers from my brother's law firm, she might have been involved in other scams, too. To be honest, she never paid the alimony she owed me. When I visited the lawyer to ask about it, he explained that now that she was in legal trouble, getting any payments would be nearly impossible. I wasn't too concerned about the money, though. What mattered more to me was seeing her face the consequences of her actions. I believe my brother would have wanted the same. I asked the lawyer to ensure the police thoroughly investigate her other crimes and prosecute her to the fullest extent of the law. Meanwhile, my family moved into the house my brother left behind. It was an unexpected inheritance, and my husband and sons were thrilled. We had been living in a small apartment, so the big house felt like a dream come true. My eldest son became even more determined to study law. Watching my brother's colleagues and subordinates argue with my sister-in-law over legal matters inspired him. Though he was never adopted by my brother, I hope he will carry on his legacy and become a brilliant lawyer, just like him. On the other hand, my second son was a bit disappointed. He told me, "Honestly, I wish Uncle had adopted me. Then I could have inherited everything." He said it with a half-joking smile, but I knew he wasn't entirely kidding. Still, as a family, we were grateful for everything my brother had left us. His legacy was not just the house or the money, but the inspiration and values he passed on, especially to my eldest son, who was ready to follow in his footsteps.